Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Breaking Down Barriers, Supporting Marginalized Communities During COVID-19. Before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items to run through. Today's presentation will be recorded, and a copy along with the slides will be sent out to all registrants. Attendees are in listen-only mode. However, if you'd like to chat with us or ask a question during the presentation, you can do so on the right-hand side of your screen in the GoToWebinar control panel. Finally, we invite you to connect with us on social media by tweeting @Cognito or using the hashtag CognitoWebinar. Now, before I turn things over to our panel, I just wanted to say a quick word about Cognito for those of you unfamiliar on the line. Our mission is to combine the science of learning, the art of conversation, and the power of virtual human simulations to measurably improve social, emotional, and physical health. We empower faculty, staff, and students to take an active role in creating a healthy and safe campus environment for all. Through evidence-based experiential simulations, we offer a personalized and private practice environment for users to develop and practice communication skills aimed at promoting healthy behaviors while reducing harmful ones. I'd now like to introduce today's moderator, Darren Jones, who serves as the Manager of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships at Cognito. Prior to Cognito, Dr. Jones served as the Associate Vice President of Student Engagement at Mary Baldwin University. He held roles within student affairs at several universities across various functional areas, including orientation, learning communities, retention programs, student life, fraternity and sorority affairs, intervention sciences, resident life, housing, academic advising, leadership development programs, community standards, and Title IX. Wow. Darren, take it away.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to engage in this important conversation. Again, my name is Darren Jones, and I serve as the Manager of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships with Cognito. So I'm very excited to engage with our panelists who I've met just recently, and already I know this is going to be a worthwhile conversation. So I'm excited to see everything that and hear everything that they have to share. And so with this important topic. So what we're going to do first is we're going to have the panelists introduce themselves, and then we're going to engage in conversation. And feel free to engage in our chat feature if you want to. You're rooting for what someone is saying, if something resonates with you. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to write them down. We're going to have opportunity at the end of our time for you to ask our panelists any questions. Okay, and in construction of this webinar, our panelists have had many conversations about this topic, and it was three major themes that really came up. And so what you're going to see is our panelists and hear our panelists comment on these themes through their experiences in working on college campuses, but also I love when we have an actual student where we can hear about the lived experiences. So I love that. So we're going to start with Kristen. If you can go ahead and introduce yourselves, where you're at, your employment interests, and a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I'm Kristen Gray, and I'm at Hope College in Holland, Michigan. I am a clinical psychologist, and for a little over 22 years, I was the Associate Dean for Health and Counseling. Recently done a professional shift in preparation for a more retired lifestyle. And I am working as an off-campus study advisor part-time. So I'm kind of having fun at this point in my life. I think that's about it.
Thank you. Veronica?
Okay, so I'm Veronica Mixon. I am a senior at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and I'm majoring in African American Studies and Psychology. And so I know I may not be a professional, but I can give the student insight, especially since my student insight is more so through like a lot of the leadership positions I've been in, as well as the involvement I've had through campus orgs and other things like that. So I'm happy to be here.
You're a paraprofessional, so you are a professional. Aisha?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Aisha Okta. I am a clinical psychologist, and I'm in my 7th year as director of the University of Louisville's Counseling Center. I also serve as the chair of the Student Affairs Diversity Committee and the Growth Mindset Committee here.
All right, and Mary.
Good afternoon. I'm Mary Chandler Boland. I'm a psychologist by profession, and I'm in my 22nd year as director of the Counseling Center at the University of Kentucky. Across my professional career, I've been active in the National Advocacy Organization and with suicide prevention efforts nationally and with accreditation of counseling services. And here at UK, I've been active particularly with LGBTQ students. Glad to be here today.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So we are going to get started with our conversation. As I stated before, there's a co-construction of how this was going to flow. And one of the first
Mary's here.
topic that,
Yeah, hi, Darren, I'm here. I'll go ahead and introduce myself if that's okay. I think Darren's screen froze. I'm sorry to be late to the meeting. The power in our building suddenly shut off about 30 minutes ago. And I've been racing around like a crazy person, like, I have got to be on screen. You got to go. What are we doing? So before I was going to race out the door and go to another building, all of a sudden the power came back on about 3 minutes ago. So I apologize for I'm blaming the big snowfall we just had. So I apologize for my lateness. I'm Barry Schreier. I'm the director of the University Counseling Service here at the University of Iowa. I've made my entire career in campus mental health. I've been at various universities, including University of Connecticut, Purdue University. I'm also on faculty in our doctoral program in counseling psychology also here. So I hold not only the student affairs professional mental health hat, but I also hold a faculty hat as well. And my areas of interest have always been in training in mental health, and also, like my good colleague Mary, do a lot of work with our LGBTQ populations, and particularly working with our trans and gender non-binary communities. Glad to be here today. And Veronica, I just want to say, I hope everything's okay in Birmingham. I know you had a big tornado recently, and hope everybody's faring okay.
Yeah, yesterday was a lot, but I came out good, so
Good.
just a lot of rain.
Okay.
Glad you're okay.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you.
Well, I think there's Darren.
There's Darren.
Barry's introduced himself. Welcome back.
So
Yeah.
we can see you, but we can't hear you. You look happy though.
No. Technology, biggest friend, biggest enemy, right? Depending on how it works.
Yeah.
It's sort of our relationship with tech.
can you hear me?
There
Yep,
it
there
is.
you are.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So sorry, my computer died. Okay, so sorry. All right, so we're going to take two on everything, and welcome back. So Barry just introduced himself.
I did. Yep. I'm sorry to be late.
Awesome, 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 awesome. So sorry about that. One of the first topics that really was highlighted was the experience of grief and loss. As we know, during the pandemic, everyone has experienced different types of grief. And so I'm going to pass it to Barry to really talk about what you have seen and your observations of grief and loss, and how is it translating in the student experience?
Yep, great. Thank you, Darren. So I'll get us started with just a few comments, and always welcome my colleagues to chime in, because we each are going to bring our unique perspectives, and hopefully coming together, we will make as whole a picture for everybody as possible. One of the things I am hearing a lot on not only the University of Iowa's campus, but across other campuses is sort of the sentiment that mental health concerns and mental health issues are on a huge rise in the ongoing pandemics that we are managing. And so it gets framed a lot around depression is up, anxiety is up, students are suffering a lot from increased anxiety and depression. And we're not entirely sure if that's true, despite that is the most popular narrative out in the media about the experience that students are having. And this is true also for our faculty and staff as well. One of the things we are aware of that doesn't get as much talk, that really does bear out a lot of discussion, is that we are all in the process of a lot of ongoing management of grief. And we often think of grief as kind of like what we experience when someone dies, but grief really is the emotion that we hold, because that can be the most extreme case, but grief is the emotions that we hold around loss. And many of us are experiencing tremendous losses, and some of us potentially are only experiencing disappointments, and all along that continuum from unreplaceable losses to potentially repairable disappointments. And the grief is such a huge conglomeration of emotions that is not linear, that moves back and forth, which can explain why on one day I might say, I'm actually doing pretty well today, and then 3 days later I'm in a terrible mood, or I'm really sort of can't get myself out of bed. The other is trauma, and we're certainly aware that a lot of folks are holding a lot of trauma, and big T trauma, little t trauma. It just depends sort of what one's background is and how much trauma I sort of continue to sort of hold in my life. And this has been nothing short of traumatic for so many. And it can be because there's been a death in my family, or I have parents or a partner who is now out of work, or I have been the ongoing target of systematized racism, and I am managing all of that. Or I am somebody who is out as an LGBTQ person who had to go back in the closet to go back home, or whatever those losses and challenges have been, also can begin to create trauma. The nice thing about holding grief and trauma as a lens is it moves basically the pathology outside of the person. As soon as we start telling people they're depressed and anxious, they become the problem. The problem is you. And typically what we're seeing around a lot of our students and staff and faculty is that if you don't mind me using this word, if there is craziness, it is in the world right now. And I am simply responding to it. And so I may be coming across with having anxiousness, depression, those kinds of symptoms, but I may simply be responding to the world that I'm holding right now. And so being really thoughtful as we work with our communities on campus around how we place pathology, the language that we use, and acknowledging how difficult and traumatic and full of loss and grief ongoing our communities and our world is right now, and that folks are doing the best they can to manage. And that might then surface symptoms that look like depression and anxiety, but being careful and holding compassion and patience with each other as we respond to those things.
Yeah, love that. And you're talking about the management, right? We're doing the best that we can manage. So I'm gonna point this to Veronica when it comes down to managing, right? Tell us about your experience with grief and loss, and it can be your own experience or what you have witnessed with your peers.
So I feel like my experience is really similar to my peers. Essentially, especially since this is my last semester in college as a senior. And I think it's a lot of grief and trauma in the fact that it may not even be impacting me personally, but it's the fact that I know a group of people or I know the greater community in the university is experiencing what I'm experiencing. So it's essentially this space of like, we all understand that we're grieving in the fact that we're losing our experiences. I know like a lot of freshmen I've interacted with um, felt like they weren't really getting the college experience that they signed up for. And I think it also impacts in the fact that we're not able to develop our identity the same way we did before COVID-19 hit. I know when I came in, I was very timid and shy, and I was able to get out of my shell because there were opportunities to. But now you come into college and you're already put into a box. And even with Zoom University and things of that nature, you still have the support, but it's not the support that we're all used to. So I think managing it has been a very difficult, especially since I think when we talk about grief, we talk about, the experiences that we're going through, the trauma that we're going through, but I feel like there's not a lot of nurturing it. There's not a lot of spaces to allow us to actually address it and how we're feeling and actually have spaces where we can overcome it. Because I think even within that, like you come to school, like even this semester, I knew it was going to be tough. But when I look at the resources at my campus, I'm thankful that we have them. With the new chat lines we decided to create and like the new app that we started to create for students to manage their mental health. But even within that, there's still this and like there's still this loss that you still have to hold on to, and there's not a lot of opportunity to let that out. And there's ways through like coping mechanisms and things of that nature. But I think that community component is really really hard to come past, especially since like I know within the Black community here, we're really tight knit. Like we'd always host events, we'd have like cookouts, we used to do like a BSAC barbecue at the beginning of the semester and at the end of each semester. But now it's like a lot of those community groups, like we can't meet anymore unless it's over Zoom, and students are zoomed out and tired of having to be online. And we're still trying to manage that hat of a student while manage our own mental health, while manage social media trauma with racial injustices and things of that nature. And so it's a lot of different experiences that we may not be experiencing firsthand, but we're having to hear about that makes it even harder to carry that weight. So like I said, I think it's a lot.
Yeah.
And I feel like students are, as Dr. Barry said, I'm sorry,
Yep,
Starter said, it's really hard because the first thing you want to say is that, oh, I'm depressed or I'm anxious or I'm this and that. But we also have to recognize and forgive ourselves and understand that, it's okay to feel anxious. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to cry. I know I told one student that yesterday when she was telling me she was really overwhelmed about starting this semester, and I was like, but it's okay. I mean, those things are natural, but because, you know, society has always told us to keep working and to keep pushing, and we never really get a break, it's hard for us to understand that those things are okay as students. So I think it's a lot of us reevaluating what college really means to us and what experiences we're getting out of it. So it's that a lot of stuff to carry, but in the same sense, it also allows us to look at college outside of just a social stance. Because I think that's what a lot of people come in thinking like, oh, this is my chance to go out to, you know, but it's, you know, there's still a lot of growth in there. So I think it's a lot of grief and understanding that self-compassion is okay, but we're still getting there.
That 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 was a lot. That was a
Yeah.
lot there, right? And for Aisha, Kristen, and Mary, when you hear all of this, right, and knowing that that social experience really is on the forefront of students' mind when they come into that experience, and that is gone, right?
Mhm.
And so, how do you find what that experience is that you so like it's glamorized, right? And it's great going into it, but what is it now, right? And people don't know what to expect. So when you work with students over this past, 2 semesters, right? So in the spring and then the fall, what are some of the things that you have seen? And you can feel free to even respond or expand on what you saw in relation to what Veronica mentioned.
One of the things that Veronica said was the thing that I want to touch on is this judgment piece that's involved in this. So I should be better at this. I should be over it by now. I should be able to do A, B, and C. So first of all, none of us have ever dealt with this before. So nobody has a list from, usually working at a university, there's standard things you can expect at certain times of the year, right? This is when this happens, so we do these things. This is when that happens, we do these things. It's homecoming, we do this. For us, it's Derby weekend, we're going to do that. For this, we don't have a list. We're making the list now every day. So they're that having that sense of I should be better at this or I should know what to do. None of us know what to do. And then those of us who you would normally come to for support, we're telling you the opposite of what we used to say. We used to say, go hang out with your friends, do this, do that. And now we're like, you can't do that. Don't do that. You'll get reported if you do that. There can't be more than, this number of people in the room if you do that. And it happens, like people are telling on each other, and then that creates a whole different culture about being social. So it's definitely more difficult at this point for students to feel like, not only they're not getting that traditional experience, but even normal coping strategies are not options right now. And we can't talk about, reality testing or people, being paranoid or whatever. There really is a virus in the air that's killing people. That's the truth. So there are a lot of layers to it that make it a little harder to kind of wrap your mind around that. And plus you have an exam to study for.
Yeah. Kristen, I think you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I think too the fact that this in some ways is so ambiguous, right? We can't like name this is it. If there is a death in the family, I can say this death, this specific, this identified loss. And I think the more we can help students name their experience, and I'll touch on kind of a different one. I'm at a predominantly white institution, and part of this has been naming for our white students that part of what they're experiencing is facing social injustice as a white person. And if we can't name it, we can't help them move into it. So we've got students who are feeling awful, and they're not naming it. No one's helped them. Right? If you're an 18-year-old and no one has helped you identify that, it can be a tough place and a place of getting stuck, right? And we don't want our students getting stuck there. So I think part of it is naming what is the loss, what are we experiencing, and I think that can be helpful. Even as we don't have a lot of the traditional ways of coping, if we don't even know what it is that we're struggling with, then we're, I think, in a more difficult place.
And I would add to that in terms of thinking about students who are parts of communities that experience the most harm. So BIPOC students, LGBTQ students, international students, students with disabilities, first generation students, harm in a variety of ways, including being excluded from university life sometimes well prior to COVID. And so I think being mindful of students who are in those communities, being mindful of how individual differences manifest, and not to assume that because somebody's part of a particular community, they need X, to be really intentional to ask what people need in terms of support, in terms of community. And I think for the institution, for the university, certainly to partner with offices that are student facing that have been the points of community for a lot of our students. One example I would give is the MLK Center at UK is one of a number of places that students who identify as Black, African American, Afro-Caribbean, that's one of the places that has been between classes, like where do you go to hang out? A lot of times there would be programming over the lunch hour. There would be times where there's not only programming, but just community. And being able to be in that same space with a limit of 10 people has been a huge loss, I think, and that's just an example, one of many. And so I think for the university and for us as a counseling center, partnering with those offices, and even if it's by Zoom, to offer some community gathering spaces, informal, not me as a psychologist coming in to put on my psychologist hat, but just to come in and do a lot of listening and to ask, how are you doing? What might you need from the people in this room, from those outside the room at the university, and really taking our cues from what is shared with us from their own personal experience, rather than putting on an expert hat and assuming that we would know what individual students or groups of students would need.
Right, right. So we're gonna move to the next topic, and I'm gonna mention just one piece, and that is knowing all of the experiences, and this is new, right? So there's no secret sauce on how to navigate, and when you go through particular experiences, of course, there's trauma involved in it, and specifically for marginalized communities, and depending upon your social identity, everyone is dealing with something, right? And really it's impacted by how your upbringing, your cultural background, the expectations, societal expectations, and whatnot, and how students cope with that is different, right? So when you think about, trauma and compounding trauma, Barry, I'm gonna start with you. Can you talk a little bit about, what you've seen, what that is, how do people navigate it? Give us a different insight.
Sure. So the metaphor that I use here on this campus, because this is we've talked enough about it that people are now asking about it, which is great progress in and of itself, that folks are holding this lens more and more. I talk about it as sort of links on a chain. And every traumatic experience becomes a link on a chain. And the more links you pick up, the longer the chain gets. And if you've ever tried to pick up a really long chain, the more you pick it up, the heavier and heavier and heavier it gets. And this is kind of the metaphor that we kind of hold here, is sort of, when one student's doing really well and understanding you greatly, and another student is just floundering and flagging and struggling, you might, instead of like, what's wrong with that student, you might hold the frame of like, I wonder what's happened to that student, right? Rather than what's wrong with you, what's happened to you, which allows me then to lean into questions of what's going on, how are you doing, to find out how much chain you're holding. And that can begin to then help me hold that student as I'm sort of thinking about them, the numerous identity pieces that they are holding, and lean into that student as a whole human being, rather than simply as this person that's not doing their work or not getting things done or is struggling in ways that other students are not. Because none of this is one size fits all. And what tends to happen is we tend to put out kind of like things to do and sort of here are some hints and tips, and what happens is they get picked up and are sort of held as one size fits all. Here's what you can do to assist all students. And our students are all having very different experiences depending on their race, their ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, their socioeconomic standing, their first generation standing, if they're international. Each one of these becomes so critical, and holding the idea of how much chain is this person holding and what's happening to them rather than what's wrong with them.
Right, right. So I'm gonna bounce it to Mary Chandler. You can continue through your lens, right? So we're talking about financial instability. I see that as a point up here. Can you talk a little bit about that, what you've seen, and give us insight as well, your thoughts?
So certainly here at the University of Kentucky, there are some students who have always had significant levels of financial challenge. And in addition to student loans or other mechanisms they might have to take care of their living expenses as well as academic. But what's been helpful here is that we also have an office that is able to receive reports either from individuals or about individuals who may be struggling with basic needs, basic living needs. And that certainly has been profoundly more difficult since the arrival of COVID last spring, because so many of our students may work either on campus or in the community in hourly wage jobs, servers in restaurants, other kinds of positions that when things started to shut down, all of a sudden it was like, oh my gosh, I can't pay my own bills. And some of those students might have been helping to support family members or others. There were also students that then had to leave campus to maybe go live at home for the spring semester when things changed because of family needs or other reasons. And so I think one of the things that's been important is to look at creative ways to find out what do students need to ask them, and to find creative ways to help with that. So there were certainly CARES money and federal money that came, but at UK, we have an Office of Financial Wellness, and they reached out and had individual conversations with students to better understand what did they need and to help them be able to access some additional funds that came in through donors, through philanthropy to the university, and not small change, $100,000 that came in pretty quickly that students could use for rent, for transportation to get back home, for therapy if they were out of state and couldn't access the counseling center because of licensing limitations. So I think for me, the key piece is always to try to better understand what does that individual student need. Are there ways to help offset that both inside and outside the institution, and to help them in that moment, and then also some planning for then what next, because I think that was the real impetus last spring, was like in that emergency moment, what are we going to do to help people get what they need? But then also as students began to return in the fall, what were their opportunities for perhaps work on campus that could be in an office and would be in a safe situation in terms of risk of viral transmission, but they'd still be able to have some income.
All right, all right. And our next point we have here was about international students and that transition. So, Kristen, can you touch a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think one of the things that we watched very early on in the COVID restrictions, we watched our international students refusing to let other international students be isolated. It's very interesting, right? We will not allow, as a community, one of our other international students to be living alone and be isolated. So we kept getting reports that these, they're breaking the rules, and we had to say, wait a minute. They're protecting each other, and we need to work within the restrictions that have been handed down to us by our state to support our students and find ways that they can be together. So we did some interesting housing shifting to bring people together. We asked students pretty early, when we realized that a lot of our students would not be able to travel home. We said, okay, how do we set this up so that you have community within this shutdown, within the limitations? How do you, and it goes back to Mary saying, what do you need? Very clearly they were acting on their need, and once we started asking, not telling them stop doing that, but asking, why is this the fourth time someone has had to remind you not to do that? They said, well, we can't let that person be over there alone. So we said, okay, let's move you. Let's identify who the communities are going to be. Let's move you together. Let's hold you together. Let's give you a place where you can become a family unit, right, essentially, and identify that we will take on the risk for each other. And so we quickly found ways to have them, again, identify who they wanted to be with and support each other. It meant we had to be very creative, I think, as all campuses did, particularly over breaks, in finding employment for our students on campus. Jobs that our students who are not allowed by visa status to work off campus, we really needed to be creative and find positive work experiences for them that allowed them to have some income, but also not disrespectful, right? So meaningful work experiences over breaks that were quickly made available. So I think we've needed to work differently with that community of students, and I think that's been important.
Yeah. Now, so one last question that I have, and also Veronica, I'm gonna the last person is gonna be to respond to everything, and to definitely give your narrative. But for Aisha, when we think about just marginalized communities, it really is easy to think of them in silos, like a Black person, a person identifies with this community or that community. But then it gets complicated. We can think about intersectionality, right? And how does compounding trauma impact, because you're dealing with a lot of different perspectives there internally. So talk to me about intersectionality, things that you have seen or even working with your students. How has that shown up when it comes down to compounding trauma?
Sure. And I think a specific example that came to mind was that I facilitated a support group for students of color last semester, and I'll be doing it this semester. And there were some medical students in that group. And like I said, I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. So when a lot of that protesting was happening, some of those students said, I can hear that outside my window. It's right there. And I'm trying to study. That's the ultimate intersectionality, right? I'm a Black woman. I'm in medical school. I have this exam coming up. I can't take a break, but there's literally no place for me to go to get away from this. I can't pretend it's not happening. There are sirens, there are people, there's all kinds of things happening. But that faculty member may or may not care, like it doesn't matter, figure it out. This is when the exam is. And there were even situations where an instructor, a faculty member was willing to say, okay, you don't have to take this exam on this day if you feel like you need some time. But then those students then said to me, but I'm gonna be behind if I do that. Like it's great, it's a nice thought, but if I skip this exam, it doesn't change. They didn't push them all back, right? So instead of the exams being like this, they'll be like this, just because I need to take a moment because the Breonna Taylor non-decision came down today and I need a moment to process that. So one of the things that have been coming up is trying to balance all of those things, especially when it's almost like you said, those identities are siloed. And you talked about compound trauma, and I also think the vicarious trauma is the thing too. When George Floyd was killed, watching that on television has such an impact on me. Like, yeah, I'm in my house, I'm perfectly safe, my family is safe, but my brother looks like that, and my father looks like that, and I have a nephew, and this keeps happening, and why is this on TV? And let me go to work though. Now I got to go be the director, and I have to go be the boss. So students are managing all of those things with their own families. And a lot of times and we'll talk about this in a minute, the expectations don't change, but the context changes that everybody is working from. And so I think as people who are charged with and have signed up to support students, we all have to think about them as whole people. This is not just a student. This is a person who happens to be a student, right? But the same way we all have lives and we all have other things happening, they do too. They may have a sick family member. They may have someone that they were supporting or who was supporting them, and now that's not a thing because everybody lost their jobs. They may themselves be sick. Like people are getting COVID who are in school. It happens almost every day, I would dare say. So just to keep that in mind as people who are supposed to be helping and working with and supporting the students, that it's not just the thing that you need them to do, it's not the only thing on their plate.
Right. Veronica.
Wrap it up.
What do you?
Well, after listening to everything, it actually made me think of like how it's crazy how because of the pandemic and because of social media and trauma in social media and things of that nature has made it where there's been more conversations about how people feel. I noticed that when I like on campus, I do a lot of mental health advocacy, specifically within the marginalized communities. And it was harder for me to get students to really talk, like students to talk about things like that my freshman and sophomore year. But I noticed like now students will just randomly text me or like I'll have people who will be like, oh, where can I get resources? Where can I get this? Like, I think this is the time where the idea of college is changing, how I talked about earlier with COVID and everything, but it's also changing in support. Because as a high school student, they told us, Well, when you go to college, they're not going to care about you. Like, you're on your own. You just got to work, 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 work. Like, they're not going to baby you like they do in high school. But that makes us like go in, we're thinking, okay, well, there's the social component that I'm also not going to get as much support, but it gives me structure and I have responsibilities now. But I think it's redefining what we see college experiences as. I think now moving forward, there's going to be more opportunities for support because there's more conversations that people are having with these students. And it's sad that a pandemic has made it like where the conversations are boosting up.
Yeah.
But I also think it's good because now people are recognizing that we're not just students. And I think that's been like a hard thing I've noticed. And my university has been great with implementing things, but I did notice like students never really felt comfortable talking to professors as much as they do now. Because I think now everyone understands that we're all in this together. So if I'm stressed out and as a student, then I know my professor's stressed out. Then that means I know that I can come and have like an equal footing of conversation that may lead to like other things that I've been struggling with. So I think it's also creating like opportunities to address these traumas and the griefs that's going on in the community. I know conversations aren't normally like the best thing for people. I know people don't like talking about their feelings, but I think right now it's been easier to talk about how you're feeling because you know that like I could go on campus right now and I see another student and I know they're probably stressed out like I am. So I know there's like the community, not only within my own like in group, but I also am connected to people outside of that now because we're all going through the same things. So I think we have all those traumas, we have all those experiences going on, but I think there's also this idea of us actually having more conversations about intersectionality in our roles. And I think that's
Yeah.
really amazing, especially from what everyone's been saying. Like everyone's like, oh, well, I talked to this group. I actually talked to this group. And even on our campus, like our USGA is finally like, oh, let's make a actual committee and have all the Black student orgs and let's actually like make something happen. So I think there's a lot more initiatives going on because it's easier to have these conversations now. So yeah, that's what I was noticing on my campus and kind of picked up from what everyone else was saying too.
Yeah, thank you. And that is a great transition to the next thing, which was about campus support, right? And we're now in a position where people are kind of like, it has really ignited innovation and creativity within how we support, who we support, because we're now looking at, okay, well, where were the gaps in equity, when it comes down to who is receiving support, who is adjusting well, who isn't adjusting well. And we're going to start with Barry. If you can talk to us about, student support and, the transition that is being made when it comes down to assessment and evaluation and enhancement and improvement. So yeah, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, I always have to start. Okay. Sure. So a few things around support. One of the things that I like to say, especially to the campus this year, is you better check your norms before you wreck your norms, because to continue to proceed on with sort of the same expectations of performance, the same expectations of sort of showing up, it's just simply not reasonable. I look at a number of our graduate and professional students who now have children at home full time. Kids don't go anywhere. They stay home. And now I am a full-time parent and I'm running a daycare in my living room and a third grade classroom in my kitchen. And I have to go to school. And so the idea that we continue to hold the same norms, same performative expectations is simply it's not holding up. Those norms are getting wrecked because we're not checking them. One of the easy things we can do, and it seems like it's trifling because it seems so rudimentary, but we surveyed our students on this campus this year, and one of the biggest pieces of feedback we got is around this idea, which is before we start class, I go around if I can. I might have a lecture of 500 people, but those are going to be broken down into sections, and so TAs could do this. Before we start class, as I check in with you, how are you doing? Let's go around and talk about name something we're looking forward to this week. Or let's talk about the thorniest thing that is in your pocket right now. And checking in with students. I really appreciated Veronica, sort of that whole person idea, and not seeing these things as just students, but these are real live three-dimensional people who are often struggling with the same thing that I'm struggling with in a lot of ways. And so my empathy may be high if I just simply check in with you. We're really encouraging staff, faculty, no matter what role you have with the student, rather than engaging in these sort of, like I call it the Midwestern two-step, which is saying, hi, how are you? Fine. How are you? Fine. And we sort of move on and that's it. To go by and say, fine in what way? What's going on that feels fine? And leaning into our students more so than potentially we ever have before to find out, how are you doing? And so we might find out about those compounded traumas. I might find out that I have been sitting watching the news and I'm seeing one sort of like injustice after another and I can't get it out of my head right now. And I haven't been able to do my homework because I'm sort of so focused on the impact of racial injustice. Or I'm watching sort of, you know, all these terrible things happening to the LGBTQ community in my state, or whatever it might be. But taking time, slowing this process down and leaning into our students before we get into the performative nature of our campus and checking in with them to find out how they are doing. That simple step goes such a long way. And what we found out from our students is they are clearly aware of who checks in on them, and they are very aware of who does not.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so we're going to go actually around just to talk about support. What is actionable items, right? What can professionals do to support marginalized students in their campus community? We're going to go to Aisha.
Sure. Well, one thing that comes to mind is being more proactive in terms of providing resources. So a lot of students may be having a struggle and they have no idea that there's something set up to help them. Like Mary said, we have something similar at U of L, and it's an emergency fund. So if something happens, hey, somebody broke into my car or my laptop broke, you can get money to get a new one. But how would a student know that? Right? We don't have resource fairs where they can just be walking by and see a table and pick up a pamphlet or something. So we have to be more intentional about making sure students know what's even out there for them to support them. That's the first part. There's more responsibility on students now to ask for what they need because we don't have chances to just see them. In student affairs, there's a lot of student facing offices where they're used to students just kind of coming in and saying hi, just because you know this person, you like this person, and that's the person, like Barry said, that would check on you. So now we all have to do that. We all have to be intentional, but that also means that we have to be willing to be seen as whole human beings as well, right? We can't say, oh, I'm fine, let's talk about you, if we want that student to open up. And it might be something just as simple as, well, you know, I'm a little stressed out today, or, you know, I didn't sleep well, but I'm here and let's do this, and how are you? So I'm not saying share your life story with a student, but we are conditioned to have that automatic response. I'm fine, I'm okay, I'm good, I'm well. And for myself, I've started, sometimes my answer is, I'm here. When people ask me how I'm doing, I made it to work. I got the computer going. I'm at this meeting on time. Let's do this. That's where I am. So, you know, leaving room for students to decide how much they want to share, but we do need to step our support game up because there are a lot of things that are available to students that they don't know about, and they won't know unless we make a point of telling them over and over and over again.
All right, here we go to Mary.
So I want to touch back on other things that have been said, I guess, in terms of, you know, supporting the students, but also supporting faculty and staff colleagues as whole people that are complex, that inhabit different communities and have a lot of different identities, and really taking that into consideration. And then I think, to echo what Aisha said in terms of communication, that to equip our student-facing partners across campus, use those existing relationships, build new relationships, make sure the people who are having contact with the students have our information, and that it's easy, that it's like a sheet with a bunch of like clear bulleted points where people don't have to look up a lot of information, that it's easy to access. And I think in the same way, this goes to what Kristen had said in terms of international students really looking out for one another, being aware on our campuses of who are the natural student leaders. They may not be the president of the organization, but most organizations or other cohorts, they're one or more students that's kind of the go-to, who knows what's going on with people, and making sure when we can identify those students that we also equip them with the resource information, whether again that's a document that's easy to access online, but also having us as clinicians be easy to access. So we've continued to have what we call Let's Talk, which used to be in person in different locations around campus, and now it's Let's Teletalk. So it's 2 hours a day, 5 days a week in the afternoon or evening. And it's drop-in informal consultation, and the students can just come in. It might be a 10-minute question, but they don't have a lot of paperwork to fill out. They don't have to be a client. There's no fee involved, and it's an easy way to access whatever clinician might be on duty at that point in time in the moment pretty quickly to try to get an answer, and that might be a redirect to another resource. So making it easy, I guess, is the one thing I would say.
Thank you. Sorry, yeah, my my dog is really really bothering me right now. So we're gonna go to the next person, Kirsten.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been able to do, and I'm, by the way, Hope College is a small school, so it may be a little different than some of the major universities, but we try to be really aware of providing appointments and service for students in terms of who we hold on campus and who we refer off campus. And so it might seem really obvious that if someone has insurance, they should be referred off. However, if that's going to raise an issue with family, and the question can be, why are you going to see a therapist? And it's because you and your same gender identified partner are struggling, that might not really be a good option. Or if we have a student who has great insurance and has the copay in their pocket, but their family is really opposed to therapy, then it makes sense to hold that student on campus. So I think we've worked very hard that there's no barriers to service. And that means even in terms of who is referred off if that's needed. So it's kind of embracing that social justice idea even within something as simple as scheduling. What does that look like? I also think as a cisgendered white straight woman, it's really important that I'm educating myself.
Right.
I'm responsible, not my clients, not my students, not the college. It's me. I have to be the adult. I have to take responsibility for who I am and what I know and what I don't know. And so I think that's another way in which, as clinicians, we're really called to serve all of our students, not to stay in my niche and this is the group I'm comfortable with or this is what I know. But if we're not daily stretching ourselves, then I think we're really failing our students. So those would be just a couple of kind of, you asked for action items, so those would be my action items for you. Really easy access, social justice based access, and then tons of self awareness and growth in education.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Save the best for last. All right. So before we get into, because we're going to go into questions, Veronica, as the student on the panel, and I'll phrase it differently. What do you need from us? Right. This is like if you're representing all the students across the nation, right? You are educating us on what is the sauce, because we're going to bottle it up and sell it, right? What do you want from the folks that are attending on this call to know, number one, and what do you want them to do? And how do you want them to be, right? As you're thinking about supportive mechanisms on their campus and their own individual support and for the systems, right?
I think it goes back to like my first comment on like understanding that we're not just students, and also understanding that, you know, conversations need to be had, but based on those conversations, you're going to recognize that all students have different needs. So the best way I can explain this is like how my institution did it. They have not only created support groups for different groups on campus, they've also made it where student orgs took it upon themselves to actually be like, let's gather together, have board meetings, or let's partnership on certain events to provide resources and push them out to different components of campus. But also within that, like even Counseling Services just pushed out a mental health app. And this app is so innovative in the fact that it really touches on the fact that like all students kind of cope in different ways. So, you know, you have some students who are like, oh, I want to talk. There's, oh, I'm the type, I'll figure it out myself. Or there's some that just withdraw from everything and don't really search out anybody. not students or professors. So I think it's pretty innovative because not only through the app can you get your own mental health resources, but you can also be connected to on-campus resources and on-campus events. So I think what would be beneficial would have like a centralized unit or a space where students could access everything. And that way, if they didn't feel comfortable having that conversation, or even a professor, because faculty and staff are human too. And sometimes they may not want to talk or they may not want to share like a student sharing. So by having like a centralized place, it allows people to where those people who may not talk much, they'll be able to find what they need and grab it and go and reach out to who they need to reach out to. And then you also have it where students can still use it, but still go to their favorite professor and be like, hey, you know, this is what's been going on and this is how I'm feeling, and they'll be able to connect one-on-one that way. So I think by creating things of that nature that allow it to where it's diverse enough to where it can impact not only one population, but multiple populations and even intersect other populations within a campus. And then also it goes back to having that connected community. I think having conversations about how everyone's human and everyone has similar experiences and how even professors and other faculty and staff members, we're literally at our point that we're at now. You know, it allows us to kind of plant seeds in students and make it where it's easier for them to have conversations in future sense, or even when they become mentors themselves, to be able to instill those same qualities that they got from the people that they were able to talk to, or even the resources they got from their institution. So I know that's kind of loaded, but when I think of like the best way to support, that's what I can think of. Like feeling not only that, like more so not feeling like they're only targeting one group, but they're pushing, like a university's pushing out something for everybody. And it may not be that everybody can use it in the same way, but it makes it where all the resources are out there for everyone. And I know I brought this app up is for students, but it's also being advertised to faculty members. So I really love the fact that, you know, by having it where it's not like pushed into a box, it not only allows it to where students can use it, but other people who may be stressed out can use it too. So that's what I think of when I think of supporting students, is integrating everybody. And creating this app was not just like a administrative thing. It was a conversation with committees on through counseling services, other students, and then they had students test it out as well. So I think by integrating student voices and student ideas, it allows it to where it changes the campus climate and it makes it where students are actually more comfortable and will actually be able to seek out those resources because, you know, everyone was in on it. So it's not just like, oh, they made a decision without even asking what we may want. They actually took the time to talk to us and make us feel like we weren't just students. So essentially, it's pretty much what everyone has been able, like, brought up in their conversations on this webinar, is the fact that by integrating students, it connects not only the separate communities within each group, but it also connects them to the community as a whole, which makes it more comfortable for us to get those resources.
Yeah, and that's drop the mic right there, right? You just dropped the mic, Veronica. You're a professional, not a paraprofessional. You are a professional. So we're going to open it up to a brief Q&A. And I have one question for anyone who would like to answer. And the question was, how impactful do you view health and wellness coaching, let's see, during this time? And just a reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat and we'll be sure to get to it as quick as possible. So again, the question is, how impactful do you view health and wellness coaching to be during this time? So anybody can answer.
I can say a little bit about that. I think it has the potential to be very impactful. For one thing, it can cover a lot of the bases that Veronica just talked about. It gives you somebody to connect with. That person maybe knows a little something about health and wellness and mental health and can give you those resources. And then you know somebody cares about you. Like Barry mentioned, hey, like they're very aware of whether or not somebody's checking on you. And I know a lot of colleges and universities had to go through kind of a cycle of that and setting that up when the pandemic first hit and everybody got sent home. We got to check on people. What are we going to do? You know, for the counseling center, there was a small window, but still a window where we had appointments scheduled that we couldn't have because we couldn't be there. So we just started calling people. You know, we know your name is on our list. We know we care about you. We want to check on you. So I definitely think that if a student were to have some sort of, you can call it a coach or mentor or whatever, focused on the health and wellness piece to talk about all of these things. It can be very impactful for students.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would jump in on that. I take a look at our model here at the University of Iowa, and I think it's similar to a lot of counseling centers. It's a fairly westernized model of delivering service. And so I may be struggling with things and I don't want to go talk to a mental health counselor. That's not how I perceive myself, and that's not the type of service. You can translate your brochure into as many languages as you'd like. I'm not coming. That's not my gig. It's not how I roll. And so the idea of going to someone to be coached or talk to an expert that offers advice, I think, is a nice way to de-Westernize. And Western models are good models. It's just the only one to help de-Westernize our models and make opportunity to approach service in a way that's not just that sole Westernized mental health model. The other thing I was thinking about with it too is, mental health is not a standalone either. It is part of the larger well-being thing. And so I may not be struggling necessarily with anxiety, perhaps, even if I'm exhibiting those symptoms. I may be overly tired and not eating well and isolated.
Yeah.
And so going and talking to someone who might sort of take a more holistic approach to me and take a look at nutrition and sleep and exercise and social connectivity and my use of social media and the popular press and everything else that impacts me might go a long way towards assisting me with my overall well-being, which then could also improve my mental health.
Awesome. Veronica, go ahead.
I was going to say, this made me think of something at our university we have. So I'm a certified peer educator, and it's through our wellness department. And I think that's another thing to think about as well with this. Like if you have peers, other students who are certified or other students who are knowledgeable on things, it may be easier for other students to also like want to get help from them. But also you could spread it out to where like we do presentations on for student orgs. So like by like having one student, that's like the, I know someone brought it up earlier, there's always that one student that has the information that spreads it out. By having peers also do that, as well as professionals, you're not only getting like students who need it or like, student orgs that want it, but you're also having students who are knowledgeable that might just be on campus one day and have a student that is like, oh, I recognize you from here. Can you help me with this real quick? And you give them the resource, and now you spread that resource to someone else and they spread it to someone else. So I think that would also be a cool initiative that I've seen is pretty cool here. But yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. I have going to go to the next question. How can we best tend to student frustrations and not take it personally?
Well, I think going back to what Barry led off with at the beginning, everybody is dealing with a situation that none of us have ever dealt with before. And to recognize that all of us, students included, are having really normal human reactions to this place that we find ourselves in with the pandemic, with social injustice that's in the forefront of discussion in ways it's never been before, with all the other losses and big T, small t traumas that we have. And to the degree that I can just sit and accept and help that person hold their experience and validate it, that my job is not to protect me from what they're experiencing. My job, I would say as a clinician, is to help them understand their experience, to validate it for themselves, and if there are changes they want to make around that frustration, to help them find ways to do that. Maybe that's me, maybe that's other resources, but really being very intentional that this work is for the benefit of the student, whether I'm a clinician or I'm a student affairs member or I'm a health coach or whatever the role might be, that who are we serving? And if we can keep that student's need in the forefront, then it's really not about me. If it feels like it's becoming about me, then I need to go and debrief with my partner or my therapist or my colleague or somebody else in terms of being able to keep myself available in a healthy way that keeps the student need out in the forefront.
I want to add one little piece to that. I 100% agree with what Mary said about validation. Also, sometimes when people are frustrated, they complain, they just want to be heard. They know you're not in charge of the virus. They know you don't work for the CDC. They know you're not the president of the university unless you're the president of the university. But they're not necessarily, sometimes they know there's nothing you can do about it. They just need to get that out. And sometimes the answer is, you know what, you're right, that does suck. And it's okay to say that. That doesn't make it your fault as far as taking it personally. They know that. Like when you want to get angry at the customer service person, It's not about that person. You know that person isn't actually in charge of what's happening. It's the same kind of thing. Sometimes people just want to be heard.
Right. So we are right at time, a little bit over time, and I want to continue. But we have to, for the sake of time, we're going to go and in this session. I wanted to thank all of the panelists. Thank you all so much for providing your insight and wisdom so that we can use this information and just improve our practice and also be able to share what we've learned thus far. Thank you all to all of our attendees. And I'm going to pass it to Scott. Do you want to close out?
No, if anyone has any closing thoughts, more than welcome to share them now. Other than that, I just want to be respectful of everyone's time and move to close.
Yeah. So does anyone wants to drop the mic?
I just want to express my gratitude and what a privilege it was to serve on this panel with these esteemed colleagues and our wonderful student. And Darren, I appreciate your facilitation today. So thank you for calling us all together so that we could share wisdom and hear from each other and engage in the exact thing that we were advising others to do. So
Yeah. So I will close and say thank you all so much. Again, we look forward to having more opportunities like this. So stay on the lookout for more fruitful discussions. All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
All right.
Woo, Veronica. Woo, woo.
So thank you. Thank you.
Good
I was
job.
nervous.
Wow. Such a pleasure to get to meet you and hear all that you had to say. These other people, these are my people.